This is AP Lit. This is AP Lit, the first class. We're looking to the glossary and looking for the words that are going to be on the test tomorrow. I want to use the same. Okay, we're starting at image. Image through whatever we said, myth, image, this is so simple, and the definitions, you know what an image is, but please understand that it's the five senses, that good images appeal to one or more of the five senses. It's not just any kind of description of something. It's hard to describe something without using five senses. So remember that as you study these for, as you think about them, like they're going to ask you to look for images. It's every time something to the sound, taste, smell, and so forth. Imadeus Ray, you remember that one, right? Indirect quotation, you know this. Irony, it doesn't say that, but let me just read it. A mode of expression in which the intended meaning is the opposite of what is stated. There are actually three kinds. Why don't you just write this in the margin? There are three kinds of irony. There's situational irony, and that's when the opposite happens of what you expect. Like you got a doctor who's smoking a cigarette. You got a fire in a fire station. That's kind of the opposite of what you would. It's ironic why is this doctor smoking? Isn't that terrible for you? Then you have verbal irony when you say things like, the old horror movie where the butler escorts the guy in the spooky house to the bed, and he says, "Have pleasant dreams," and he starts laughing. He doesn't really mean that. You tell he's saying words, but he means the opposite of those words. And then lastly, it's called dramatic irony, and that's the most subtle. And dramatic irony is when you know something as a reader that a character does not know. Like what?
It's like Oedipus.
Explain. Yeah.
In Oedipus, he's out on a mission to, I believe, kill the person who murdered the king, not knowing that it is him who murdered the king, but the audience knows that.
We know.
So we
Great.
see the irony in the situation that he's setting out to, in short, kill him.
Right, and that's quite common, and it's very helpful. Look at the example. We didn't read this. Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, water, water everywhere, and not a drop, nor any drop to drink. They're on the ocean, and they can't drink any water, yet they're surrounded by water. That's an example of irony. Yes, did you have a question?
Yeah, you don't want like a lot of examples for this one?
Just having an example is so helpful. It tells you that you really understand it. So I would like examples. Some are not necessary, but like in the Deus Ray, I think a great example of that would be most epic poems start in the middle of the poem. Iliad starts at year 9, I think, of the 10-year war with Troy. So the war's been going on for 9 years. It's not at the beginning of the war.
Odyssey starts in Carthage, right?
You mean the Aeneid?
Yeah, and he starts in Carthage.
I don't remember.
Does the Odyssey?
We go. I know we go back to Troy. We definitely go back to see that.
Does Odyssey start Imadeus Race as well?
Yes, because remember he's on the last island that wherever. What's her name? Calypso. Is that her? Is that the one? He spends several years there. So yeah. We also start there with his son Telemachus. Remember, I think that actually the Odyssey starts with Telemachus, at the end of the 20 year, his father's been away. Kenning, it's very rare, you know, it's that, what do you call it? Well, let me just read it. Compound word. That's really what a kenning is, often separated by hyphen. Lampoon is a satire. I'm gonna just throw one out there. I heard this on The Oddest Places, an OTV show. A pasquinade. A pasquinade, if you ever see it, it's spelled just like it's pronounced, is a lampoon. I think it's from the Romans or something, but it's when you make fun of something. It's kind of like a political cartoon would be a pasquinade. Light verse, meant to entertain or amuse. Litotes, don't you remember that? You don't remember litotes? Well, I should point out before we go to that that was not a bad answer that we just got from Finland. It was not a bad answer. That's a litotes, guys. When you say the opposite of what you mean, and then you it was a good answer. No, you didn't.
You would stop before you could
Hey, guys,
the rest of what he's saying.
guys, you didn't even hear what I said. I said that's not a bad answer. You say the opposite of what you mean. It's a bad answer. Then you say, no, it's not a bad answer. That means you're saying it was a good answer. That's a litotes. It's an understatement. When somebody's, you know, you hit a grand slam to win the game, and somebody comes up to you and says, that's not a bad game you played there. You throw a no-hitter, it wasn't bad pitching. It's an understatement that sometimes, guys, it's an understatement that sometimes makes more of an impact than saying that was the greatest thing I've ever seen. All right, so litotes, loose sentence, don't forget, that's the common, ordinary type of sentence, subject, verb, object, subject. I don't know how many of you are even paying attention, but this will matter tomorrow, but more importantly, next week. But subject, verb, object, that's a loose sentence. I don't know why we call it loose, but that's what we call it. All the main stuff comes at the beginning and the other stuff at the end. Why is that important in analyzing a sentence? Why would that be important to notice that most of these sentences start with the beginning, subject, verb, object, and then all the details at the end? Why might that be useful? And of course, it's opposite the periodic sentence. Why might that be useful? Well, if most sentences start with the subject, what does that mean? That means the subject is the most important thing, right? So what if somebody throws in a periodic sentence that starts with the details? What conclusion are we to draw from that? Let me repeat that. Maybe John can figure it. If the subject usually comes first, subject, verb, object, and it tells you that whatever comes first is the most important thing. The subject is the most important thing. But what if you write a sentence that's periodic where the details come before the subject? Then what conclusion can we draw?
The subject isn't as important.
So what is important?
Details.
That's incredibly important because the details are usually just that, the details. You know, we ignore details to your disadvantage. Don't ignore them. But if the details come first, then the writer's telling you these details, which normally you would overlook, are extremely important. That's what you say when you write the papers. And you notice that? Oh man, it says I had to write about syntax. I got it. The syntax is usually loose, but now I see a periodic sentence. He's emphasizing something. All right, lyric poetry is most of the poetry we read in the fall with the Romantic poets. That's lyric, personal, reflective. It's a broad category of poetry. I usually contrast lyric to narrative. Like narrative is telling stories. Everything else is lyric. That's a simplification, but that helps me. You see lyric. Maxim is a adage or aphorism. It's a proverb, all right? Melodrama, I don't know that we've read one. Dickens sometimes borders, I think, on the melodrama. It's a literary form which events are exaggerated in order to create extreme emotional response. Who did we read about this year that would love melodramatic literature? Someone who likes to read stories that have events that are exaggerated and that are extremely emotional. Which character did we read this year? I wouldn't ask you the question if it wasn't one of the most prominent books that I've stressed over and over should be a part of your preparation for the exam. Which character in Huck Finn would have been one to have loved melodramatic literature? Tom Sawyer. But it could have been, are you thinking about the girl? Exactly. Very good. That's actually who came to my mind first, is the girl. And I realized Tom Sawyer. Good job. Metaphor. Please be aware of these things. You're going to make your A, if you want one, by being able to pick up these details. If you're not, if you can't, incapable of doing that, then that's going to be hard for you to make up for it. Metaphor, comparisons. Metaphysical poetry, I think he talked about that last year. The work of poets, 17th century, used elaborate conceits, highly intellectual, expresses the complexities of love and life. Can I give you an example? This would be John Donne's poem, what did he call it? Gosh, I can't even remember the name of it. But it's when he and his wife or lover, he compared it to a geometrical compass, that has the two points. And he made this elaborate comparison between she's the fixed point, I'm the point that roams, because he was either dying or he's going on a trip. He says, but notice how the compass works. Even though I'm miles, hundreds of miles away from you, in a compass, no matter how far you stretch it, the pencil part makes an exact circle around the center point. He kept calling her the fixed point. That's a conceit. Those are the kinds of things metaphysical poets like to do. The more complicated, the better. I think it was a contest. Meter, remember, what's the difference in meter and rhythm? Elizabeth. Meter and rhythm. They obviously have something in common, but how do they differ?
Rhythm's just kind of like the beat, but meters more focused on the stress and unstress.
That's the same thing. Beat and stress and unstress, that's the same thing. So they both have that in common. So what do they not have in common? Let's see what Tyler's got. What do they have? What is the difference?
Is it just meters and poetry?
Yeah, you're on the right track. Explain.
Meters only poetry, I guess, represent the whole generic.
That's true, but we need to go a little further. What is meter? If it's only in poetry, what is it? That all the other language has rhythm. So meter is rhythm that is what? What?
Like rhythm can be manipulated
What do you mean?
depending on like how you say it, whereas meter is fixed.
Fixed, yes, but what do you mean? I just want to make sure you understand it. Those are good words if you know what you mean.
I don't know how else to explain it, but it's like rhythm can be very like subjective, I guess, and you can change it, and then meter has sort of like guidelines.
Okay, guys, how about let's honor her question here. All right, she's trying to define meter. It's a real simple thing. I can't believe you don't know what it means. Meter is a pattern. Write the word down. At least you can do that. At least you can write. So write the word pattern in. You couldn't remember what it meant, but you can write the word pattern in. It's a pattern of rhythm. That's what Tyler was getting close to saying. All language has rhythm, but only poetry, and not all poetry has meter. What kind of poetry is poetry with no meter? What do we call that? Very good, thank you. So pattern of rhythm is what meter is.
So rhythm is the general one,
That's right. All language.
Rhythm in a pattern is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, metonymy. All right, we read this one, I think, but I'm gonna give you, metonymy is one thing that's associated with something else. So two things are associated, and the one thing stands for the other thing. Now, that's really vague. That's so broad, so we have to use examples. In one of the poems by Wordsworth, he was talking about Milton. He said, the problem with England is the altar, the pen, the sword, I can't remember what and the hearth. He used those four things. He said, the problem with England is the altar, the pen, the sword, and the hearth. Each one of those are metonymies. What do I mean?
As a representative of something else.
Right. So start with the altar. What does that represent?
The church.
And the sword.
The,
Yes. The pen
artists and writers.
and the hearth.
Home environment.
Family. Exactly. That's how metonymies work. There's something related. Like the altar is not the only thing related to the church, but it is one thing. The sword is not the only thing. Even the Bible uses the sword as a metonymy for the civil authorities. So we should respect those that have the sword, which means those that have authority to kill, which is the law and the courts and the government. That's a metonymy. We're almost done here. Middle English, you know what that is. That's Chaucer. A mock epic, remember the nun's priest's tale? Write it down. If you know, write it down. Make some effort here. This could be the only studying some of you ever do for this. Is writing that word down, one word. We've accomplished something here. Mock epic is the nun's priest's tale. You remember he's making fun of epic poetry by having a chicken and a fox, and they made a big deal out of that, made it sound like lords and ladies. That's a mock epic. It makes fun.
Seriousness of an epic on a non-serious topic.
And it creates humor. That's comparison of talking about chickens and foxes. That creates humor, which is what you're mocking. That's the mock part. You're making fun of it. All right, mode. You know what the word means. It's on every piece of electrical equipment you can find has a mode to it. And which one do I press? Do I press the menu or do I press the mode? And I got to think through that. So you should know that. A general form, pattern, or expression. Montage, that's a common word. You hear that a lot. Can't you get those on phones? A quick succession of images. I can't imagine. We haven't seen anything this year that I've used that word for, but mood's important. Mood is the feeling or emotional tone in a work. What's the difference in mood and tone? Max.
Kind of blinking right now.
That's a move that.
Anybody know the difference between mood and tone? Because they're going to ask you. We've written several papers this year where they ask you about the tone. We've used the word over and over. How could you possibly not know what that means? Yeah, John.
Is mood how you feel, then tone is like how you address people?
I don't get the difference in those two. That's not right, but I don't even get how those two things are.
Is tone the author?
What do you mean the author?
That's what I was trying to say.
Whoever said that, was that Tyler? What does that mean? Because you're kind of right, but I don't know what you mean. What do you mean how the author writes? Yes. That's right. Write it down. It's the author's attitude. They may use the word tone, they may use the word attitude. It's the author's attitude is what tone is. That's not the same thing as mood, although the two words in other contexts can mean the same thing. Like I went to this I don't know, restaurant. It was the tone of the restaurant. You know, you could say it's got the mood and tone, but that's not how we use it in our line of business here. We separate them. The mood refers to the emotional, like if it's a horror movie, it's kind of Yeah, it's scary. If it's a sad story, it's sad. But tone refers to what the author's attitude toward it was. You remember the Convergence of the Twain? The Titanic went down, and half of you said, maybe not in this class, but half of students every year say, he was really sad about it. No, he wasn't. You're sad about it. I'm sad about it. The Titanic is sad, right? Yeah, but the poem was not sad because the poet's attitude wasn't sad. He wasn't stressing the sadness of it. Do you remember what we said about the tone of that?
Stresses on the irony of it.
And the fall, he was pointing fingers. It was these people that put this ship in there that they said was unsinkable, but couldn't even get halfway across the Atlantic Ocean before it sank. The first time, he was angry. He was, or you could at least say he was objective. He said the fish are smarter than these people. The fish would swim by and almost use the word vainglorious. They would say, who brought this vaingloriousness down here? It's like he was pointing out how the fish, the mirrors that were meant to glass the opulent, it says that. So now the fish float through it and look at it. I mean, it's again mocking this thing everybody said was so great. It's at the bottom of the ocean, useless. It's worse than useless because we know 1,500 people, but he never mentions one time one person. See, that's how Tone works. You know, you're thinking he ought to be sad about this, but his attitude not at all sad. I mean, you could be sad. Maybe he was personally sad, but that wasn't the purpose of the poem. Moral, you know what a moral is. I should point out that unfortunately in modern literature, morals are considered, what's a good word? Not fashionable. Because if you're a modern writer, we don't tell people right or wrong in modern literature. We just show life as it is. Say that again?
That's for you to decide.
Right,
not us.
but that's not always true with previous literature.
That's previous
Yes.
literature, is right.
Exactly, there are right things and there are wrong things, but all literature is, no good literature, I think, is strictly didactic. What do I mean by that? No good literature is only didactic. All good literature, you could write a sermon if you wanted to be didactic, but good literature must entertain. And so the greatest literature is able to teach us things without us thinking we're being taught. We're getting fooled into it. This is a great story. The whole time he's teaching you certain things without you realizing it. That's why it's so great. We're almost done. Motif, muse. Most epic literature starts with an appeal to the muses. And myth, finally, and we'll look at some of these, the rest of these. Myth means, well, you know what a myth is. I don't think we need to go into that. So those words, if you can't do anything else, because there's very little you can study for, but go back to this glossary. Go from here on to the end. If you don't know one, study it. And which means we got about 7-8 minutes left, and this is taking us a little longer than I thought. But get out your book. If you don't have it, just listen. You might have things that you could write down, but that's effort, right? Let me just see how far. Yeah, I didn't get it very far. So if any of you want to jump in on this, if you have questions, that's a good thing. You know, we bounced all around. Let me just review some of the things we said. This is a great book to prepare for. In fact, I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to give you one more of these. I'm giving you two more. There's only one today. This is This is what you need to be doing between now and next Tuesday. You need to be filling out 3 of these. And one of them is on the book that we're reading, the 2 others, and I'm giving you one more. And again, it's pointless that you get somebody else to do it for you. The whole point of this is for you to do it yourself so that you'll learn about the book. You'll know the book so well that next Wednesday when you sit down, you'll have 3 books in your head that whatever they ask you, you're going to pick one of those books. I promise you, you're going to appreciate that. You're going to be tired. Some people write that first. I don't think you're required to write it in order. So you you could, some people go to that one because they already have that book in your head, and they pick a story with a character that does it. I'm using this one, and they write it. And then, but you gotta be careful because you only got 2 hours. And so about 45, no one's gonna call the clock on you to say time, I don't think. That's completely up to you. If you forget, you're in trouble. You can have watches, remember these? These are very useful. They don't do anything, you gotta look at them and figure out what time it is. They only have 4 numbers on them, 3 numbers. The 12, the 9, the 6, and then the 20th, which is not even the date of today, so I'm off on that. But very useful to keep an eye on the clock, to say, I gotta stop at 1:45, because if I don't, I'm never gonna finish this thing. Yeah,
No, I didn't get
yeah, sorry. I got plenty. Did none of you got
Oh,
one?
well, did I not pass them back? That's fine.
That's all right. I'll take it. Everybody has it? All right, so let me just quickly, in fact, let me just use this, since you all have this. We got 5 minutes, that's not a lot of time. We've talked about most of the thing on this first page, so I'm not gonna redo that. Look at this author style. Remember we said the style was symbolic, it was impressionistic, it's personal, it was elusive, it was hard to understand, obscure. All that's a part of the style. And as far as quotes, I'm gonna let you look at those, but the names of the characters, I think we did this kind of review. I think, of course, Marlowe and Kurtz, 5 minutes. I asked you one of the questions, tell me about Kurtz, and most of you tell me one thing. I tried to, I had to give you credit, it was a really broad question, but there's so much to say about it. What can we say about Kurtz in 5 minutes before we go? Tell me about Kurtz. Julia, give me one thing about Kurtz.
He is admired by a lot of people.
Some people did go so far to say he was considered a god. He's 7 feet tall. He's a white man. He's brilliant. They worshipped him. His height didn't hurt, but what was the one thing that probably made the difference? It was his voice. He had the ability, remember he speaks a different language, he speaks German. I don't know how he picked up the language of the Congo so quick. What else would you say about it?
He's from Europe, he is a church there, but he also is a mistress in the Congo.
Yeah, which tells us, this guy's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a book you haven't read yet, but there are two Kurtzes. There's the Kurtz that was like the prodigy of prodigies, the guy who was gonna be running the whole show, who was this incredible gifted person, and then the guy that goes into Africa, and what were on those stakes surrounding his hut? They were heads. And Marlowe he heard about these customs, that in order to approach Kurtz, you had to crawl on your belly like a reptile. And I was gonna point this out, and I can remember to do it tomorrow. On one page, it talks over and over about the ship, or the steamship, crawling to the inner station. Use the word crawl over and over and over, which suggests that image of, idol worship, where you crawl, get down on your stomach and crawl. And at the end, what's the last time we see him before he's dead? He's out. What's he doing? The last time we see him out of the ship, he escaped. What's he doing? He's crawling. He's crawling toward the witch doctor that's out there in the bush somewhere and doing his thing. And here's Kurtz crawling to him. So even Kurtz, the god that he was a slave to something, which, if you know anything about the New Testament, in Paul chapter 7, he said we're all slaves to something. And none of us are free. We're either going to be a slave to sin or a slave to righteousness. And this book tells us all that's true about human nature. It just doesn't tell us how to get out of it. Because Marlowe even becomes a liar, and Marlowe's the only guy that you can kind of respect until the end when he lies about that girl, to the girl, not about her, about her. Please, you got a week. Hopefully this was Monday, and you're not thinking clearly, but you've got some things you really need to prayer. Bring the book back with you tomorrow. You need it every day, and we'll see what we can do to get ready. We'll see you tomorrow.